Fighters do have curves in their life. It's an up and down, peaks and valleys. But when they've grown up for 10 years, you've seen it. You don't want to see the valley, unless that.
Especially Rocky's valley,
big time. And it was short-sighted on my part. I thought, okay, this is dramatic, but wrong. It's dramatically right, but philosophically wrong to the audience.
It's safe to say that most people really don't like Rocky V. Even Sylvester Stallone himself has gone on record to express his disappointment with the film. Behind-the-scenes turmoil and an overwhelmingly negative audience reaction led to, by far, the most disliked movie in the franchise. It nearly even KO'd the entire series, being the last Rocky movie for 16 years before Rocky Balboa was released in 2006 to redeem the saga in the eyes of many. We could spend plenty of time going on about what went into the making of this film and what led to certain unpopular decisions being made. There's a lot of information out there about what was supposed to happen in Rocky V. Rocky was supposed to die, the direction of the movie was supposed to be very different, etc. But this video isn't about how Rocky V went off the rails, it's about making it more appealing to the audience while retaining most of the original intent. Hindsight being 2020, we can use elements from the preceding films in the series to make a more compelling and all-around more satisfying story, like Rocky's comeback in Rocky Balboa, or the introduction of Adonis Creed from the more recent Creed films, the latter being the most intriguing notion. Along with other important elements to retroactively fix this fourth sequel, what if Adonis Creed was in Rocky V? This is FanScription. Before we get into anything, know that this is a sequel to my previous fanscription about Rocky IV, titled What If Apollo Creed Didn't Die in Rocky IV, so I'd suggest checking that out if you haven't. The bottom line is that Apollo survived his fight with Ivan Drago, and the injuries sustained paralyzed him from the waist down. Thus, in this version of Rocky V, Apollo is still around and will have a big role to play in the story. Now, let's dive in. The opening of Rocky V, recapping the Drago fight from the end of 4, has always been my favorite of all the intros. Bill Conti returned to score this film, and his contribution to this sequence was phenomenal. It's one of his best fight overtures, combining older themes with new, more intense and powerful stuff. Everything feels so much more impactful and chaotic. The return to this classic approach was also a welcomed one. The synth soundtrack in Rocky IV was always something that bugged me. This, in combination with some really well done editing, captured how truly brutal that fight was. I wouldn't change a thing about it. The next scene with Rocky in the shower calling for Adrian snaps us back to reality. Rocky IV was so far outside what we had come to expect from the series up to that point that at times it felt like a borderline fantasy. Seeing the physical toll Drago's punches had on Rocky is exactly what we needed. This is a scary scene. Rocky is quivering, disoriented, and confused.
I just want to go home, Mick. I'm just tired. I just want to go home, okay?
We have to keep this tone going early in the movie, so this is where our changes start. Instead of wiping to Rocky's triumphant return to the US at the airport, we dissolve to the doctor's office scene from later in the film. The specialists explain that Rocky's initial tests don't look good, but aren't quite clear yet. You will have to go through more to see how serious his injuries are. Adrian takes this as proof enough, and after seeing his physical and mental state following the Drago fight, she's looking for any reason to stop her husband from fighting. Rocky's reaction to the suggestion is similar to what happened in the film.
I don't want to retire, this ain't the time to retire, not in here, not in the office.
While he was feeling his age before the Drago fight, Rocky doesn't want this to be the end. It's not how he wanted to go out. Adrian pleads with him that he can't keep doing this to himself and his family. Reluctantly, Rocky agrees to finally hang up his gloves. We cut to 5 years later. Yes, we're actually going to have a time jump here. It's desperately needed. So the year is 1990, and we fade in on a news report about Rocky. It's sort of a where are they now piece talking about Rocky's financial troubles and that he's having an estate sale today. This is another thing that people generally don't like about Rocky V, but it has to happen for there to be an interesting enough narrative to warrant another film. At the beginning of Rocky IV, he was on top of the world. He lived in a mansion, bought robots, and all types of extravagant things for his family. With his loved ones close by and all his fancy possessions, there's not much of a conflict to threaten the character. That's one of the things I really appreciated about Rocky V. It tried its best to bring the series back to basics. Dropping Rocky back into his old surroundings was a good way to do that. And remember, I'm trying to stick to some of the original intent here. Rocky V can't work without Rocky losing his fortune and dragging him back to a place where he can pull himself out of. As for that overly complicated explanation,
the piece of paper Paulie had you sign wasn't a request for an extension on your tax returns. It was a blanket power of attorney in favor of the accountant, who was involved in some very high-priced commercial real estate.
We really don't need all that. This is where the time jump can work in our favor. The news report can quickly explain, as is laid out in the film, that Rocky failed to pay his taxes and mortgage in several years. We know Rocky is terrible with money, and if he trusted someone who wasn't fully on the up and up, it's not hard to believe that most of his fortune would be burned through in a few years with no new cash coming in. Rocky overspends, gives copious amounts to charity, and wasn't even paid for his fight with Drago in 1985.
Are you nuts?
With Rocky being a little more punchy post-Drago, he's not comfortable doing any kind of commercial work, and soon after his retirement, he was out of the public eye anyway. All he really wanted was to just live a sort of secluded life with his family. Losing everything he gained over his career is as sad as it's portrayed in the film. We cut to the estate sale, and this is our introduction to Sage Stallone's version of Rocky's son Robert. We keep their interaction here, which is very sweet and sets their relationship up well.
Don't worry about it. We've been down before. I'll get it all back. We just gotta stick together, right? Home team.
Yeah, right.
You know, Mickey used to say a fight ain't over until you heard the bell. We ain't heard a bell yet, have we?
For the next couple scenes, nothing changes. Rocky and Adrian reminisce on the origin of their relationship. Rocky goes back to the old neighborhood and finds himself caught up in old bad habits. This leads to one of the best scenes in all the Rocky films, which is the flashback sequence at Mick's gym. I love that moment, and it was a stroke of genius to bring Burgess Meredith back in that capacity. His mere presence just adds something that was truly missed. From there,
take you back. Do 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 do, take you back, yeah, 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 take you back.
This scene stays the same, showing a distraught Rocky move back into the old neighborhood with his family. He later accompanies Robert to school, trying to teach him about his new surroundings. So the relationship still has some focus early on. From here, things take a much different turn. One of the biggest changes I'm going to make regards Tommy Gunn. A lot of people really don't like that character, but we're going to use him in a different capacity. In this version, Tommy Gunn is sort of in the Union Kane role. When we first see him, he's going to have already been with the promoter, George Washington Duke, for a good while. He's fighting in a championship bout and wins the title easily, making him the youngest heavyweight champion ever. This is quite the accomplishment, but the crowd is not thrilled. We can use part of Mason Dixon's storyline from Rocky Balboa here. The heavyweight division is as bad as it's ever been. Not to mention, with Duke in control, some of these fights aren't exactly 100% legitimate. It's been half a decade since Rocky retired, and people long for the days when they had someone like him to believe in. This leads us to the post-fight press conference, which plays out in a similar fashion to the original film. The reporters give Tommy a hard time for the fight looking so easy, which draws Duke in to half-heartedly defend the new champion. One of the reporters brings up that Rocky is reopening Mickey's gym, and that maybe Tommy should go train with a real champion. The press room erupts at the suggestion.
He might win a few fights, but a Rocky Balboa he'll never be.
No. He's no Rocky Balboa. Let's face it, there's only one Balboa. Now, Balboa was a true people's champion. But in time, Tommy Gunn may be able to fill his shoes. Next one.
Tommy is still the hothead we see towards the end of the original version, and he's fuming about not being respected. Duke chases him away from the podium, and they engage in a slightly altered version of that same hallway scene.
You can't fight the press. I can't fight the dog press. And as long as they got Balboa in the brain, he'll always be champ. The man fought wars in the ring.
Tommy storms off, leaving Duke with his business partner Merlin. Duke seems struck with an idea. Goad Rocky out of retirement for a match with Tommy. Merlin says Rocky's been out of the game for years. Why would he come out of retirement now? Duke smirks and simply says,
None of these bums think straight. All I need is a hook.
We cut to a familiar face. Apollo Creed, front and center, is cutting a ribbon at the opening of a children's hospital. He's been doing a lot of these charity-type events in the years since the Drago fight paralyzed him. He's rededicated his life to giving back. Also, his reputation and public image have never been better. While he's still the confident former champion we know and love, it's obvious that Apollo has changed for the better. With his wife Marianne at his side, Apollo takes a few questions from a news crew covering the event. After a query about the hospital, the reporter asks Apollo's thoughts on infamous promoter George Washington Duke calling Rocky Balboa to come out of retirement for a fight against the reigning heavyweight champion Tommy Gunn. Apollo is a bit taken aback by the question and says this is the first time he's heard about it. In his usual charismatic way, he makes a lighthearted joke about letting us old dinosaurs finally go extinct. They all chuckle at his quip, but under his smile, Apollo seems a little bothered by the question. Outside Mickey's gym, Duke approaches Rocky, and that scene plays out as in the film with a couple small differences. This is the first time Rocky meets Duke as he tries his hardest to pitch Rocky the matchup with Tommy. Duke is nothing if not a devilishly good motivator. What he says in that scene about Rocky still being a draw and how one fight could fix his financial situation are all valid statements. Rocky is quickly drawn into Duke's charismatic promise of redemption.
You represent the dreams of the long shots, the little people, the never-wills identify with you. And identification is the key to public success. You're a true champion, a true product of the people. Don't sell it. Sell it while there are still buyers. They ain't gonna last forever. You say you're a fighter, then fight!
Adrian gets involved and chases Duke away, but Rocky is left frustrated and somewhat intrigued by Duke's offer. Meanwhile, Robert is having the same tough problems adjusting to his new school, which means he still gets beat up and robbed of his jacket. When he goes to the gym to tell his dad about what happened, he sees him working with the boxers. Robert can sense how worn out and mentally drained Rocky is, so he reluctantly goes home to let his dad be. With no Tommy Gunn to compete for Rocky's affection in this version, Robert sees his father constantly working to try and regain some respect for his family. Rocky's demeanor is very off-putting to his son, and he almost becomes unapproachable to Robert. Their relationship slowly begins to strain. Duke continues to hound the Balboas, calling them, making statements to the press, etc., but for the most part, his approach is to flatter Rocky with his legacy and sell him on delusions of grandeur. When he realizes this isn't working, Duke decides to switch strategies. He sees a newspaper article about Apollo at another charity event. He stares at it for a moment.
Listen, got an idea. I think we can finally nail Balboa.
We cut to another press conference with Duke and Tommy, where Duke says he had Rocky all wrong. He's not the pure underdog champion he thought he was. Interested from earlier, Apollo is seen intently watching the press conference at his home. At Mick's gym, one of the fighters directs Rocky's attention to the nearby TV set that's tuned into the press conference as well. Duke first calls Rocky an irresponsible coward, then pulls out a file of papers and exposes Balboa's criminal record to the press. It's been alluded to several times before and even specifically mentioned in Rocky V.
With the investigation of the accountant, out pops a criminal record of Rocky's for assault in connection with loan sharking.
The public wasn't aware of Rocky's transgressions prior to this, and it would absolutely taint his image a bit. His mostly squeaky clean persona could be in some jeopardy. But that's not the biggest announcement Duke has here. He says scumbags stick together and starts talking about how other past champions aren't quite as authentic as they appear to be. Namely, Rocky's old friend, Apollo Creed. He asks,
would a true champion, hell, decent human being, father an illegitimate son, and leave him and his mother for dead? Because that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what our old favorite Apollo Creed has done. The man has a son who he's never met, who's all alone at a foster care facility right now because the boy's mother just recently passed away. See, now I understand why someone like Rocky Balboa wouldn't want to fight a real champion like Tommy Gunn here. There are just too many skeletons in the closet. Tommy Gunn would not only humiliate and expose the bum as a far inferior fighter, but he would also expose him as the deplorable, disgusting degenerate that he is. Only in America can someone be lifted to the stratosphere only to be hiding who he truly was all along.
Apollo is silently confused and shocked at this statement. He hears a plate break behind him and turns to see Marianne with a devastated look on her face. At Mick's, all the fighters are looking at Rocky. He's clearly embarrassed and asks one of them to shut off the TV. We dissolve to the foster care facility where Apollo's son, named Adonis by his late mother, is staying. Apollo is seen waiting with one of his handlers and is wheeled into the room where his supposed son is. A caretaker there tells him Adonis has been isolated from the other kids because of violent outbursts. As soon as he catches Adonis's young eyes, Apollo sees something familiar. He delicately tries to talk to his 4-year-old son and does his best to hide his own shame and sympathy for the boy. After a few words are exchanged, Adonis asks Apollo who he is. Apollo can't bring himself to answer as he holds in a tear from falling down his cheek. This scene is meant to be somewhat similar in tone to Adonis' first meeting with Marianne in the first Creed film. Adonis is introduced to the audience, and with this discovery, Apollo's character continues to evolve. The scene where Robert knocks out the bully to get his jacket back stays the same. He's been training to defend himself at Mick's with Jimmy and Paulie, while Rocky's been distracted with work. He goes straight to the gym, proud of his accomplishment and eager to show his dad. With all that's been going on recently, Rocky seems genuinely uplifted to see his son so happy. However, they only have a brief exchange before Jimmy interrupts to say that Rocky has a visitor. Rocky says it could wait, but Jimmy thinks he'll probably want to see this guy now. Rocky reluctantly tells his son they can talk more at home. Robert is left feeling neglected again and leaves. The gym just closed for the day, so Rocky walks to the other side of the empty space and sees Apollo waiting for him. Rocky seems to have been expecting this, but he finds it's not so easy to look his old friend in the eye. Apollo comments about Rocky not returning his calls for a long time. Balboa says things have been pretty rough for a while now. Apollo asks if he needed some help with money, why didn't he just come to him? Rocky says he could never ask that of him and blames himself for his family situation. Apollo accepts that and shifts the conversation to what's been said in the press lately. They talk about how Duke has damaged both their reputations. Rocky can't help but ask if the claim about his son is true. Apollo says he went to see the kid recently and that yes, he's the father, but swears he had no idea. He had a moment of weakness in the months leading up to the Drago fight, but he promises that was a lifetime ago. He's a different man now who's still paying for the mistakes of his past. His wife is taking some time to herself and he's going to be taking the kid in. Rocky asks his name, and Apollo responds, Adonis. Rocky lightheartedly jokes that sounds about right, and the tension is broken for a moment. Apollo asks Rocky if he's thinking about taking up Duke's challenge to shut him and his boy up for good, but Balboa does not seem interested. Apollo doesn't know about Rocky's possible brain damage, so he says he's a little surprised but understands. He can tell Rocky is very distant, so in an attempt to reach him, Apollo mentions that he still has nightmares. Not about the fight with Drago or almost dying, but that he often dreams about simply walking, running, playing with his kids. Those are the good parts. The nightmare starts when he wakes up and remembers he can't do those things anymore. And all of it is his own fault. He has to live with that. If he still had his health, there's nothing he wouldn't do to help his family, old or new. The retired Italian stallion silently soaks in what's been said. Apollo tells Rocky he'll see him around and to try to return a phone call every once in a while. Rocky is left conflicted and pondering Apollo's words. That night, Rocky and Paulie go to Andy's where Duke and Tommy show up. It's meant as another publicity stunt, but this time tempers flare.
He's the real champ. You're just a goddamn joke. Now, just get out of here before I break the flip. Tommy, come on. Paulie! Come on. What?
Break your hand on that bummer. What are you worth then, huh?
You knocked him down. Why don't you try knocking me down now?
No. In the ring. Tommy Gunn only fights in the ring.
Rocky is ready to fight Tommy then and there, but in this version, Duke and his crew pull Tommy away and they leave before Rocky can get to him. It's clear from the look on his face that Balboa has had it with this game they've been playing. We fade to a courtroom setting where Rocky sits in front of the Pennsylvania Athletic Commission. He's there alone, and as the sequence proceeds, it's clear that he has reapplied for a boxing license. The scene plays out almost beat for beat as it did in Rocky Balboa.
The Medical Advisory Board has informed us that the battery of tests to which you've been subjected, you've passed these tests with flying colors.
The tests Rocky took this time around were further advanced from the one he took after the Drago fight. He also never had any more done after that, as was suggested, so any damage done wasn't as bad as the first scan showed. However, the board does not want to grant Rocky a license due to his age, he'd probably be about 44 or 45 at this point, and elevated risk for possible brain injury. It's here where we get one of Rocky's famous speeches.
You shouldn't be asking people to come down here and pay the freight on something they paid. It still ain't good enough. I mean, you think that's right? I mean, maybe you're doing your job, but why you gotta stop me from doing mine?
The board seems moved by the former champ's statement as he walks out of the courtroom. It's Christmas Eve at the Balboa home, and Robert is there with his new friends from the neighborhood. Rocky pulls Adrian aside to tell her he heard back from the athletic commission and he was approved for the boxing license. Adrian wasn't aware that Rocky reapplied until after he did so. She's been upset about it since Rocky told her a few days prior to this. Thus, Adrian isn't thrilled with Rocky's news and walks away from him. Robert overhears that his dad might be fighting again and eventually snaps at Rocky. All his frustrations about being ignored for so long boil over, and now that his dad might be fighting again, he'll see him even less.
We don't have to change nothing never. I mean, do you remember last year when we had fun, when we had a good time?
It ain't last year, and you ain't the same either.
Rocky and Robert have a tense argument in the basement. This scene in the original film is actually pretty good, so I wouldn't change much about it. Our same basic idea is still getting across.
You don't have no time for nobody, so I got no time for you.
Hey, what are you saying to me, kid? You're like another person.
You're the other person. You said I would be number one to you. You said that and you lied. You lied to me and you lied to Mom.
Rocky chases his son outside, but he runs away with his friends. Rocky has been so caught up with trying to get some respect back for his family that he hasn't realized Robert has desperately needed his father. All his frustrations with Duke, his son, and his current situation combine. He and Adrian get into an emotional shouting match in the street about everything that's been going on.
Hey, I don't want this no more. I want something good for the family. I don't want this. I don't want this. I mean, did I come back here and get my brains beat up for these guys to say, hey, there goes Balboa. There's just another bump in the neighborhood.
Adrian quickly changes focus to Robert, and Rocky not taking into account how he's been feeling since moving back to the old neighborhood.
For God's sakes, your son is lost. He needs you. You're losing us. Rocky, you're losing your family.
Rocky apologizes for blowing up at her. Adrian tells him that if fighting one more time is something he feels he has to do and it's safe, then do it. But he has to fix things with Robert first. That scene on the corner with Robert reconciling with his dad is a favorite moment of mine. There's no need to change a thing here, except the mentions of Tommy Gunn.
I know I made a few mistakes, you know, that's... But I would love to hang out with you again. I swear to God, it's just gonna be you and me this time.
The tension in their relationship was always something I liked in Rocky V. That angle was new to the series, and I think it mostly worked, even if a lot of the movies surrounding it did not.
Home team?
Yeah. Home team.
From here we get a scene like the one in Rocky Balboa, where Rocky's fight team is back as they build a strategy to take on Tommy Gunn. Robert, Apollo, Tony, and Paulie are all there. Apollo's been handling the business end of things and is co-promoting the fight, a condition Duke had to accept for Rocky to agree to the match. So that means Duke is making way less money than he thought he was going to on this fight. A small comeuppance for the character at this point, but we need this fight to happen in the ring. To do that, we need Duke to partially get his way. However, he's fuming about the arrangement and needs Tommy to win to keep exploiting the young champion. If Tommy loses, all his value is gone, which means Duke will have to start from the bottom up with someone new. The main idea here is that Duke is doing everything he can to make sure Tommy wins this fight. Rocky and especially Apollo's reputations have taken a hit in the public eye, but they're still very popular, and Rocky's return has almost erased Duke's attempt to defame him. This fight is officially for the title, but it's obviously much more personal to Rocky and Apollo. Rocky can not only get some measure of revenge on Tommy and Duke, but he's looking to restore his name, earn enough money to get his family out of the woods, and make his son proud of his father again. There's a lot on the line here. Tony realizes that Rocky knows everything there is to know about boxing at this point, but he's 5 years older and 5 years slower than the last time he stepped into the ring. He's going to have to call upon all his tricks he's learned over his career to have a chance against Tommy, who is less than half his age and in his prime. The focus they're aiming for with Rocky's training is
good old-fashioned blunt force trauma, horsepower, heavy-duty cast iron, pile-driving punches that will have to hurt so much they'll rattle his ancestors.
With everyone behind him, Rocky is confident in what he has left in the tank. There is no lack of motivation, as he's as determined as he's ever been. Make no mistake about it, the Italian stallion has something to prove.
Yeah, let's start building some hurting bombs.
Rocky is training hard with his son close by, getting to watch his dad like in the old days, and they bond over this period. Finally, backstage the night of the fight, Apollo and Rocky have one more conversation. It's reminiscent of the one they had in Rocky 3. The old rivals turned friends admit there's a lot on the line for both of them, and Apollo feels like he's vicariously living through Rocky. Balboa jokes that he knows they've both said this at least a dozen times before, but this really is it. Win or lose, Rocky retires for good following this fight. Apollo agrees and thanks him for letting him be a part of the show one more time. The last line Apollo says calls back to better days.
You know, Stallion, it's too bad we gotta get old, huh?
The fight is, of course, at the Philadelphia Spectrum, the place where Rocky's mainstream career started and the perfect place for it to end. In a funny twist, Rocky chooses to wear the shorts he was advertised wearing on his banner in the first fight with Apollo, that being the reverse of what he actually wore, red shorts with a white stripe. He makes his entrance with his team at his side. Even Robert is allowed to be ringside. Adrian sits in the crowd as usual, looking proud but nervous. She can't help but be reminded of the image of Rocky shaking after the Drago fight. Nonetheless, she does her best to be supportive. Rocky is overwhelmingly cheered as he's the underdog once again. He's gotten himself into great shape, which surprises even the commentators. Tommy's introduced with Duke at his side. He looks all business and as angry as we've seen him thus far. With Duke so close by, you can cut the tension with a knife. There are a lot of bad feelings going around, and this fight isn't going to be your standard title bout. As the fight starts, Tommy establishes his power advantage, and his youth serves him well against his much older opponent. We're going to say Tommy is like a more methodical Clubber Lang type with a lot more stamina. He wins the early rounds with Rocky getting in a few good shots. Towards the middle of the fight, Rocky takes the advantage by winning a few rounds unconventionally. He switches styles a few times to throw Tommy off, using the speed Apollo taught him in short bursts to win a few battles. Rocky knows he can't match Tommy's youth, so he uses a few tricks in combination with his usual straight-on approach. As we go into the later rounds, Rocky is starting to not look so hot. The fight becomes a brawl that feels very personal, with malice behind every hook. Rocky dishes out as much as he's absorbing, but Tommy can take a punch almost as well as Balboa. Finally, in the 11th round, Rocky is hit with a shot that knocks him straight to the ground. Everyone cringes at the connection, and Rocky seems totally out of it. Adrian and Robert can barely look at the carnage. As the referee counts, Rocky's head is spinning. Just as it seems it's all over, Rocky hears a familiar old voice.
I didn't hear no bell! Get up, you son of a bitch! Mickey loves you.
Duke and Tommy are already celebrating when Rocky makes it up at the count of 9. He seems re-energized somehow. Tommy is flabbergasted that Rocky is still conscious, but goes in to finish the job. Rocky surprises him with a few hard shots before the bell rings, ending round 11. In his corner, among deafening Rocky chants, he looks out at Adrian. She seems worried but braves through with a nod to her husband. Robert asks if he's alright. Bloody and bruised, Rocky smiles at him and says,
"One more round, we go home."
Rocky looks back to see Apollo, who's holding up his fist in a show of unity. Rocky does the same. The bell rings for the 12th and final round. Both men are exhausted, and it's all about who wants it most. Hard shots are landed by Tommy and Rocky. It's back and forth for the whole round. Duke is screaming instructions at the champion.
Fight back, you boy! Fight back! You lose, you're finished!
Tommy has Rocky in the corner, and it looks like he has him trapped. After a few more exhausted blows, Rocky ducks and pushes Tommy into the corner. With one final shot, he lands a signature left hook as the bell rings, ending the fight. The crowd erupts. Tommy wasn't completely knocked down by the shot, but he almost stumbles over on the way back to his corner. Rocky is embraced by his team and family. Adrian comes ringside next to Robert. Tommy's team is confident he won the fight, as Duke proclaims loudly. The official scorecards are in, and the announcer declares they have a split decision. One judge has it for each fighter before the third judge's call. In a twist on the original film in the franchise, Rocky ends up winning the decision and the championship. The crowd and Rocky's side celebrate while Tommy throws a tantrum and leaves the ring. Duke is incensed and can't believe what he just heard. Rocky is handed the title as he hugs his wife and son. He promises no more and thanks them for letting him do this one more time. Duke, however, isn't finished with the Balboas and approaches the family.
Hey, Rock! Y'all classed the bomb, huh?
Touch me and I'll sue. Come my own pug. Touch me and I'll sue.
Robert throws a quick right hand into Duke's stomach. He didn't see it coming and is doubled over by the strike. Rocky is surprised but responds with,
"Sue me for what?"
Duke, still hurting, turns around and says his famous line.
Only in America.
With Duke gone, Rocky continues to celebrate with everyone as Gonna Fly Now plays in the background. We dissolve to the Rocky statue where Rocky and his son are running up the steps. We get that same ending scene with Rocky and Robert as the father gives his son Mickey's cufflink, except this time Apollo rolls up in his wheelchair with young Adonis and Tony at his side. He makes a comment about Rocky being late and they all lightheartedly head towards the art museum doors. We're left lingering on the statue as the Measure of a Man song begins and we're treated to images of all the previous Rocky movies as the credits roll. And that's it! My version of Rocky 5. To be honest, there's a lot I still really like about this movie. It had a lot of potential, but that potential was buried in bad early 90s music and an unsatisfying plot. I did my best to keep the essentials that the film gave us and build on the story about family while cutting out the fallen pupil Tommy Gunn stuff. Also, having a parallel side plot with Apollo's discovery of Adonis was important to the story. Apollo is still dealing with what happened to him at the hands of Drago. Adding Adonis in there would challenge his new outlook on life, but I think Apollo would rise to the occasion. Now that I've covered Rockies 4 and 5, where do I go from here with this story? Well, nowhere. With this version of Rocky 5, there's no need for a Rocky Balboa movie to redeem the franchise, and we took a lot of elements from it anyway. Honestly, we could just jump to the first Creed movie from here. It takes place 25 years after Rocky 5, so in that time, both Adrian and Apollo could have passed away, Rocky could have lost touch with the Creeds, and things would play out in just about the same way. I think here is a good place to stop, but I do have more to say about Rocky 5, so make sure you tune in to the FanScription podcast where Rob Walker and I discuss my rewrite and what our thoughts are on the original movie. Check the description below for a link and subscribe to us on iTunes. Be on the lookout for more episodes of FanScription coming soon. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, keep punching.